From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. There is a movement afoot in the Netherlands, but also in much of the world, that promotes big ag over small farming. They say it's better for feeding the world and for the climate. But is it? This is episode 468, and our guest today is Elze van Hamelen. She is a researcher and investigative journalist that is pushing back against what she calls the policy tsunami that is putting small farms out of business. The propaganda says that farmers are bad for nature and bad for the climate, but Elze contends that there is an underlying agenda to control the land and our food supply, and that in the process, they are ripping apart communities, families, and damaging our health. Among other topics, Elze addresses the 30 by 30 land conservation plan, the history of land consolidation in the Netherlands, and insights on surprising ways to support small farmers who are at risk of losing their land. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to join us at the annual Wise Traditions Conference. It will be taking place in Orlando, Florida, October 25th to the 27th. As far as I'm concerned, it's going to be sunny inside and out, with an amazing lineup of speakers, friendly faces around the Wise Traditions tables, replete with nourishing food. Go to wisetraditions.org to sign up today while the early bird pricing is still in effect. This is the conference that nourishes in every way. I hope to see you there. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Elze.
Hi, Hilda. Nice to be here again.
Last time we focused on biotech. This time I want to talk to you about agribusiness and how there's a takeover happening in terms of land on that angle of the subject. First, I want to say, have you heard that Bill Gates is the largest private farmland owner in the United States? What do you make of that? Why do you think he's trying to grab up all that land? And just give me your insights on the subject.
Well, I actually cite that in the chapter. So it's a Solari report by Catherine Austin Fitz, and I did this big research on the farmers and fishermen. And one of the chapters is about controlling and taking of all the land. And Bill Gates is just one of many players in a major land grab. And what this looks like is Catherine Austin Fitz, of course, reports a lot about the financial system. And this is blown up by pumping all this money and printing this money and by the derivatives bubble. So what's going on now, it seems, it's like a game of musical chairs, and everyone is going for the hard assets. It's land, it's houses, it's factories, it's businesses. This is part of a much bigger push, basically, to grab property.
Well, yes, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised that people with wealth are going to go after the hard assets, as you call them. I remember back in the day, the movie Gone with the Wind ends with Scarlett O'Hara saying, yes, land is the only thing that matters, so we shouldn't be surprised that people are going for that. And yet there's alarm about what's happening. Why would you say that is?
For this research, Catherine asked me, can you write the big picture? And I kind of used the Netherlands as a case study because I thought it's so weird in the narrative in the media here. They paint farmers as being bad for nature. And I thought this is such a primal, it's not a profession, it's a calling, it's a vocation. It's not bad for nature. It's industrial agriculture. But where does industrial agriculture come from? And in the Netherlands, I was aware that after the Second World War, there were these major land consolidation efforts to prepare the land for industrial agriculture. And what I found out in my research is that this happened worldwide. And it was one of the strategic goals of the US Foreign Ministry, of the State Department, to control the food supply, to control the food production. And this was in cooperation with the Rockefeller family, that in this afterworld period at the State Department, at each person that had a pivotal role there had a career prior to that at the Rockefeller Foundation. In the Western Europe, this system of industrial agriculture was largely funded through Marshall Help funds. I don't know if you're aware of this. This was to rebuild Europe.
Yes, the Marshall Plan. Yes, it sounds familiar.
And this was not primary just financial help. It was also basically a major social engineering effort with advisors, with study trips, with the universities, with the banks, with the government. There was, I believe, like one government advisor per 300 farmers. This was a very intensive push. There were articles, documentaries, to explain to these farmers, like, you need to go through the industrial model. And you also have to realize that during the war, we had a major famine and a lot of farms were destroyed and the country was a mess. And they said, we should never have hunger again. And that's why you should get into industrial agriculture. And the same thing happened in the southern half of the world, but here it was called the Green Revolution. And I understand in the US, you also had this implementation of industrial agriculture, but that's really at the root of many of the issues where we say the environmental damage. And this is where the land consolidation and the land grab starts. But really now it's really heading up.
Oh, I want to hear more about this, but I just want to interject that this, as you call it, social engineering experiment or effort is still taking place today. Because I saw something that the U.S. government put out recently saying that industrial farming is better for the environment than homesteading or the small farmers' efforts. And my mind was also blown by this information that is quite contradictory to my experience and understanding of agriculture. I feel like this push is still happening to get us all to buy in on the industrialized model, saying it's better for the environment, it's better to feed the world.
Oh, that's absolutely still the case. And this is also causing kind of a divide between the farmers. Because you have a couple of farmers that really consciously choose for organic agriculture. And then you have the industrial farmers, but they have a completely different business model. Because something that was an autonomous business model before, you own your land and you produce what you need from your land. After land consolidation, you're in debt. You need to produce a lot against low margins. You're dependent from external inputs like the fertilizers, the pesticides, etc. You get a model that's very dependent, on financing and on the international global market. And it creates a lot of dependency. And it's basically also the start of agribusiness. That's why we called this report, the tagline, the Agribusiness Takeover. Because what we talked about last week was all the synthetic foods. It's like a biotech takeover. But here you see that this industrial model goes hand in hand with these oligopolies that control the whole food chain and make it very difficult also for the farmers who want to stay independent. They don't have these economies of scale, so they can't compete with those prices. They have to go into mixed models and they have to work very, very hard just to stay afloat.
Yes, and what's coming to my mind right now is something I heard about farmers in India who were given GMO seeds. And of course, GMO seeds, let's say of corn, I don't remember if it was corn or soy, but they don't regenerate. In other words, you have a season, you plant them, they grow, you do the harvest, and then you need to buy the seeds again. And it was causing these farmers that once had been independent to become dependent on those selling this GMO seed. And then many farmers despaired so much because would go in debt, as you said, and they would commit suicide. It became a whole epidemic.
Yes, and this was not only in India. This happened in South America as well. It's like Monsanto was a big player in this. And William Engdahl wrote a book about this, and it's called Seeds of Destruction. It's difficult to get that on Amazon, but you can still order it on the site Global Research. And if you want to learn more about how this happened, I can really recommend that book.
You were saying that this situation also creates tension between farmers, those that choose the more regenerative model and those that choose the more conventional model. How so?
In the policy has been pushing farmers towards scale enlargement, which is not so good for nature. And at the same time, when this scale was enlarged, a lot of farmers went bankrupt. So we lost a lot of farmers. And the ones that are small, that are still around, they kind of feel like, well, they've chosen for that mess and now they can deal with that. So there's less solidarity. And this is not the case in all the cases. But what the policy does is that they make it difficult for everyone. For the industrial model, now at the end of the line, they say, well, you're bad for nature. And they get hit with this type of legislation. And then they have phosphate policy. And some of the big farms got exemptions and very good mixed farms. Yeah, we called ground-bound mixed farms good farms. They went bankrupt because they were hit with policy that was not even meant for them. So I call this in my research the policy tsunami. So everyone gets hit with this policy, and the end result is that many just say, like, I need to quit. It's impossible for me to commence to still make a profit. But what happens is that because they have these different models, the farmers that are in the industrial model, they've been taught that this is the right thing to do, and many still believe it. Mm-hmm. And everyone, all the advisors, and they learned this at their education, everyone is telling them that this is the right thing to do. And you really have to kind of break through this propaganda barrier to start realizing that there are other methods and it's really not necessary.
And do you think the general public, the population of the Netherlands, do you think they see through some of this agenda and this agribusiness takeover, as you call it?
It depends on which media they consume. But there are a lot of people that are in support of the farmers because I think they recognize that we see in many areas of society that there are these unjust policies that bring people and businesses and small businesses into a difficult position. There's solidarity with the farmers there. But for example, the people who are living in cities and are pretty woke, they really don't understand. They just think the farmers are bad for nature. The farmers are bad for the climate. And of course, they should go, but they don't realize who is feeding them. But 2 years ago, this is perhaps interesting. So there were these farmers' protests. And apparently for a ship at sea, if you want to signal that you're in distress, you put up an upside down flag.
Right.
And there was this spontaneous action, and the whole countryside for months on end was full with upside down flags.
Wow, that is interesting. And you were talking about media. You don't see that generally in the media, at least in the US. There's no focus on this. I understand even now in Ireland, in France, in Italy, in different countries. Actually, I don't know about Italy. There have been an influx of farmers saying, we want to farm the way we know serves nature and our humanity the best. I'm heartened by that and hoping that people will wake up, not in the woke sense, but in the other sense.
Yes.
Now, how does it trickle down to the population when it comes to food supply? The people, for example, who feed the Netherlands, would some say, Elze, well, after all, the proof is in the pudding. And look here, we're feeding all the people very well with this industrialized model.
For now, we are. And also in our part of the world, because it's not everywhere like this. But you can also say what is feeding people, because it's not nutritious food. Then you have to look purely at the calories. But I think the real risk is perhaps not the food supply, but the dependency. Because you see this report really paints this history over a longer arc. And you see that the urbanization was not purely a natural process. It was carefully managed through land use policies to make it more difficult to live in the countryside and really only build within the urban boundaries under certain conditions. So there's this policy push from the UN that really trickled down. And now a lot of people are living in these smart cities or the 15-minute cities, which are being rolled out in high speed as we speak.
I'm so glad you mentioned the 15-minute cities or the smart cities, because on the one hand, the way they're painting them is as cities that are walking friendly and better for your health, and you don't need cars and you can have everything within 15 minutes of where you live. And that's one way they present it. And the way some people see it is with skepticism, saying, wait a minute, if I don't have a car, then I'm dependent on you for everything, for my food, for my healthcare, for my education. And maybe this is more like a jail than a city. So your point about dependency is well taken, Elze.
Exactly. And so that was the point I was trying to make, about dependency. You cannot go to the farmer around the corner you still have all these corporations that are producing food, and many of them are producing synthetic food. And there's a whole influx of crazy genetic manipulation that goes way beyond what we're used to. Like, it's a very corrupted food system. For example, in 2021, there was a Rockefeller Foundation document called Reset the Table, and they're talking about food as medicine. And of course, if you're familiar with Ayurveda, then you think, oh, that's fine. But if you look at the synthetic foods that they are investing in, and basically they put everyone in lockdown, then they say, well, now there are a lot of children going hungry, but we have a SNAP program, and there's all these government programs, and you have to sign up for that, and you get these tokens, and it's basically a digital ID conditional credit system. So I think that's very concerning. So perhaps the real risk is not being without food, but corruption of food, centralization of food, and the conditions on which you get access to food.
Yes. And maybe what's at play here too, again, I'm going back to the social engineering concept you brought up earlier, is that we become grateful for the tokens. We become like beggars, dependent on what they're giving us, and grateful to our captors when we forget the price that we're paying. And it is, we're losing our food sovereignty, we're losing our autonomy and our freedoms on a lot of levels. And this whole thing about the Rockefellers, I think I'd heard that they were also behind the abolishment of homeopathy and what we now call alternative health protocols. They were behind abolishing all of that and instituting in all of the schools of medicine pharmaceuticals. They were behind that. It's no surprise to me now that they want to reset the table and do even bigger things like the Great Reset.
Well, I'm not sure if that's there, but it's called Reset the Table. And it's really about the food policies in conjunction with the lockdown. So that was really concerning. And about food as medicine. But the Great Reset is, of course, the book of Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. But there's a book by Jason Rordengaard. It's called Controlling the Game. And he basically goes through 100 years history to look at what all the agendas, like social agendas that the Rockefeller has financed. And it's very impressive because it kind of shows you that if you have enough money and you launder it through these foundations and it's being implemented in policy, that you can really change the direction of society in some ways.
Coming up, Elze reminds us of the history of victory gardens in the United States and of the small Russian dachas, or land outside of the city. And she points out how these small plots of land can make a big difference for sustaining communities with nourishing food and important biodiversity.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
The Nutrition Therapy Institute. NTI is a school in Denver, Colorado, where students learn to nourish themselves first while gaining the knowledge and skills to help guide others on their journey to optimal wellness. NTI's Nutrition Therapist Master Certification Program is a group of 13 courses with a comprehensive science-based curriculum that doesn't pander to conventional mainstream dogmas. Nutrient-dense animal foods, liver, and fermented foods appear often on the recommended food lists. NTI offers both in-person classes on site just outside of Denver, or you can take the entire program online. There are group options, or you can follow the coursework at your own pace. You choose the learning format that works best for you. NTI's flexible scheduling allows you to complete the program in 1 to 3 years. The owner is a longtime Weston A. Price Foundation chapter leader, and she wants to help those in our community achieve the goal of getting reliable, nonconformist nutrition training. And as a listener of the podcast, you can get half off of your first nutrition program by going to ntischool.com/wisetraditions and take advantage of this exclusive offer for you. Again, that's ntischool.com/wisetraditions. And the new biology clinic. Modern healthcare systems are failing us. Months-long waits for appointments are typical, only to spend 10 minutes with the doctor who quickly makes a generic diagnosis, resulting in medication dependency, invasive treatment options, and unpleasant or harmful side effects with no real cure. If this sounds familiar, consider a different approach with the new biology clinic. Founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected alternative medicine doctor, author, and speaker. His approach on health and wellness and the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. At the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that illnesses have various causes, and you deserve a personalized healing experience. Clinic members enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like virtual health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT, tapping, and more. There are membership options for individuals, small and large families, and even one-time health consults without a membership commitment. Unlike traditional healthcare that thrives on frequent visits, prescriptions, and treatments, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to get you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more, or reach out to their friendly care team via phone or email. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Again, go to newbiologyclinic.com to learn more. This is Hoda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. In 2020, in the United States, Elze, we went through some food shortages. We realized how fragile the infrastructure was of conventional food, or what we would call over here big food. In other words, a lot of the stuff that ends up in our supermarkets comes in trucks across the country, and there were some breakdowns in our ability to do that. And so people realized, oh my gosh, this infrastructure is more fragile than we thought. It seems to me if there's a consolidation of land and a continued push for this kind of agribusiness, we could end up right back where we were in 2020.
Yeah, or worse. I think to have access to your local food is very, very important. Oh, this is actually in a pharma food report, but I give a couple of examples. In the US, you had the Victory Gardens.
Yes.
And within a couple of years, people in just very small garden plots were producing 40% of the vegetables and greens just in cities, in parks, everywhere, just in a couple of years. And then there's another example. Do you know the Russian dachas?
Yes.
Apparently, one of the Russian tsars, they gave these plots of land to people who were in the city, and these are small plots of land outside the city, but it has this whole historical thing. For the Russians, it's very normal to have a plot of land outside the city with a little house on it, and they grow a lot of vegetables on it. And when Russia collapsed in the 90s, when the Soviet system imploded, that was one of the reasons that they survived a lot, because they were growing a lot of their own food. And by our standards, we would say it's very inefficient because it takes so much manual work. But when I saw the numbers, and I forget the numbers now, but it's in the report,
yes,
they are producing a lot of food on a small amount of land. Because that's also in these UN reports, that's always the argument. Well, regular farming, it costs land, it costs water. But no, like if you have people who love what they're taking care of, the land is very generous.
Yes. And you know what it reminds me of? Human beings, in a way, are inefficient, and we're also born very vulnerable. In other words, the human infant needs its parents to protect it from predators, to nourish it. It takes a while. It doesn't get on its feet till about 12 months, right? There's nothing wrong with that. There's actually something beautiful in that design. What some would label as inefficient is not a drawback. And in the same way, the quality of the food, when there are less artificial inputs and more manpower and more of that beautiful human energy going into the land, that provides a quality that it doesn't come up short compared to the industrialized model. That's something that you can't quantify either, I don't think.
Well, it's a part of the culture. And also the stories that you read, it's a lot about sharing because everyone has too much. There's a lot of sharing going on, and that's part of their culture to share. That's a beautiful thing as well, I think.
And you know what's interesting? I don't know if you've heard that Joel Salatin wrote a book called Homestead Tsunami. And what he's saying is there is this movement, I think because of 2020 in a way, that a lot of people realized, wait, something's wrong, and we want our food freedom. We want our independence. So more and more families have started to have those very gardens you were describing from the 1930s, like take their land and cultivate food on it rather than just having green grass, which a lot of us did for some time.
Uh-huh.
And they're finding a lot of joy and they're able to nourish their families through this movement.
And the important thing about this too, this is with the homesteading, but also the dachas, it's the biodiversity. Because of course a crop can fail and you can have a pest. But if you have a lot of diversity, there's resilience. And you don't have this with the monocropping.
That's true. Because you did this in-depth research for Solari and the Solari report, was there anything that surprised you as you read the numbers or the data on this worldwide movement to take the land away from the small farmers and industrialize our food supply?
Well, two things. One is that I was never taught in school about these land consolidation efforts, but 75% of the country went through a consolidation process. And I thought, how is it possible that I didn't learn that in school? But I also started to wonder, what does this do to our culture? Because in 1945, we had 400,000 farms and we have 50,000 now.
Wow, what a drop.
And before, the farmers, they would have little plots of land and they would take care of nature. And these were mixed farms and they were organic before we called it organic. And they would work the land together with others. And the land was spread over different villages. There must have been a strong community. And these are also often religious Christian communities. And then you have these land consolidation efforts and you get government advisors that tell the sons that cannot stay and work on a farm how to find work in the city. But I also realized, and I can't really find this in the literature, like it went beyond the scope of my research, but I thought they pulled the families apart. They pulled these communities apart because there's all these winners and losers. And also the way I know these farmers communities, you don't talk about it. You're not going to, but there must have been a lot of hard feelings about all the people losing their land. The church played a role in this because they were against this government intervention and people losing their land. But when the government said we will pay their pensions and other kinds of subsidies, they went ahead and kind of supported it as well. I sort of feel that it's a very important part of our history. I also researched the fishermen, and I was in this fishermen's village that still has a very strong community and a very strong Christian community. And they didn't go along with a lot what happened in the last couple of years. And what I realized is that they have, with their biblical knowledge, with their community, with just speaking to each other, they have a reality check outside everything that the screen is telling them.
Oh.
And it gives them a natural nonsense radar.
I love that. Yeah, they had the reality check. Oh, that's fascinating. And what you're saying is resonating with me too, because of the travels I've taken around the world. Mm-hmm. I was in Ethiopia last summer, and the government has put a ban on hunting. Mm. So some of the tribes that traditionally would get wild game as part of their diet no longer could. What does that do? That takes away some of their independence.
Yes.
And they were telling me in some of the communities that their children now go to schools established by the government. So there is this social engineering at play and dependence that's being created that's infringing on the most traditional peoples around the world as well.
Yes, definitely. But this is really, like, if you look at the satellites, for example, they really monitor everything, not just the cities, but all the lands. And they want to control all the land. And it's very clear from all these policy documents. And that's perhaps, I'm so glad that Catherine gave me this opportunity to do this research, because I put all these pieces of the puzzle together. And for myself, it was a discovery journey. I was trying to take the others, my readers, along with the journey, because if I start with the end conclusion, you just think, this is so insane. But I started a long arc of history and I put it all together. And at some point you think, oh, it's all adding up and building up to the same thing. But you really need the space to tell the story, because I also write for this paper and then you have one page and that's not enough to tell this type of story.
Absolutely. Now, I remember you said when we talked about biotech appearing on our plate, that you shifted your diet as a result of some of the research you did and the things you learned. What has shifted in terms of your understanding of the land and farmers' plight today?
With this research, it's really in tandem. Like, I try to not buy anything at the supermarket. And of course, sometimes I do, but I buy from local farmers. I buy from some intermediaries. So I know somebody who buys cheeses in the region, and then he's at the market, but he can show me pictures of the cows and he knows all the farmers. Whenever I can, I do not buy at the supermarket.
And you mentioned like we need to know our local providers, support those that we know are doing it in a regenerative way on a smaller scale, those that we can be closer to. What else, in addition to these two things, do you think we can do? Like, can we buy some of that land back? That's what I'm wondering. Buy it back from Bill Gates?
Yeah. For example, a lot of these farmers are in debt and they have difficulty staying afloat. And there's one farmer, it's called Lodewijk Pol from the Hooilanden, but he thought, I want to become less dependent from the banks. He sold plots of land for, I think, 10 or 20K, and he sold it to the people who buy his food, and then he leases it back. And then it becomes a community investment model. And he rather is dependent on the people who want to buy his food than on the bank. It gives him independence, but the consumers as well. So if you have money to invest, that could be something very interesting.
That is so interesting. We recently interviewed Sophie Eng, who wrote the Nourishing Asian Cookbook. And she talked about something very similar. She said there was a local farmer who was struggling, couldn't hold on to his farm. And she and some others, I think, invested in the land so that he could keep providing food to that community. Wow.
It's important because I really think there's a political agenda that needs a political answer. I think in the US, it's called 30 by 30. It's also a land grab to protect 30% of the land. Margaret Bleifeld has reported about this. But there is this major push to put land under government control, to turn it into nature areas. There's this major push to bankrupt people and buy it up through BlackRock. And as I document in this report, this agenda goes back 70 years. This is not since yesterday, but it's really speeding up right now. And it needs a political answer. And I think the most important political answer, and that's something I'm working on now, is that I noticed that a lot of people who are a member of the municipality, the politicians in the municipality, they get all this policy and they think that because they were voted in, that they have to execute the policies that they get dumped in their lap. And what we are trying to explain to them now is, well, this is all UN policy. And the people have not asked for this. They do not want it. They have very often not been informed. You are here as a representative of us. Why are you doing this? And a lot of people don't realize what they're participating in. So it takes a bit of education. And I think it needs to take place at the local level or perhaps in the US or also at the state level. Because here in the Netherlands, the higher up you get, the more dense these networks are. And you cannot reach these people. That's not where the change is coming from. But at the local level, a lot of people are just passionate about what they do and they want to do the right thing. But we have to show them what's the right thing and what's the wrong thing and start discussions about this.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh. Yes. It reminds me of something Daniel Griffith told me a while ago. He's like, look down at your feet, start right where you are.
Yes.
Super, super local, right beneath your feet. This has been a fascinating conversation. Like I said, we'll have the links in the show description and in the transcript to all the things that you've referenced, especially that Solari report. And we're so thankful for your time, Elze. And now I want to pose to you the question that I did last time, because it's always at the end of the show. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, one thing, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, there's a lot of aluminum in the environment and it's toxic. And you can quite easily detox it with silicium water or just a silicium supplement. And if you have brain fog, that's one of the things for some people really helps to just drink silicium water. I told you last time, like drink clean water, filter your water, but this is one other thing.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a fabulous conversation.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the invitation again.
Our guest today was Elze van Hamelen. Visit her website, vanhamelen.eu, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrador, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this podcast episode, visit our website, westinaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts from Linda Berniak. She called it Family Health Bible. Linda says this: a trusted resource of helpful information. If we can't figure it out ourselves, we always go to the Weston A. Price Foundation. Linda, thank you for your kind review. You too can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. The more reviews people see, the more likely they are to begin listening to the show. So thank you for doing so in advance, and thank you for listening, my friend. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.